Well, it's not always about that.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so thanks for coming. Some people may show up late. I think Brian was taking pictures or something. He's supposed to be coming in here late. So
Bradford.
Bradford wasn't going to get off of work in time for Brian to pick him up or whatever. I don't know, some situation. But that's the way it goes. But you're here, and that's what counts. So I'm glad you're here. We just finished up since January. I'm gonna call it January 1st. I don't remember what it was, but basically January 1st, we went through the whole book of Genesis, chapter by chapter. A few of them were multiple chapters, but by and large, it was kind of chapter at a time. And we really covered, in depth. We went through some science, some archaeology. We went through genealogy, geology, geography.
The genealogy in Genesis, you know how important that is. It don't get going again in the Bible till Matthew, right? When it hits it again?
No, they actually go back to Nehemiah. When they get sent from Babylon back to Jerusalem to build up, it tells you all the people that went. It says this is so and so, so and so, and so.
Okay.
And it actually gives you this is the group who went back and restarted, basically. So yeah, there are some kind of interspersed in there. None of them are probably quite as profound as the patriarchs, which is the first 10 generations between Adam and Noah, and then the generations of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then after that, you kind of get, it gets mixed up and gets tossy and turny in there. Remember we talked about Matthew, he lists even like Tamar, who is kind of this random girl who married and her two husbands died, God killed them, and the whole mess with that thing. And so the genealogy
goes into certain stories. There's got to be an importance.
Well, and like I said,
There's something you shake your head at. Like,
yeah.
How did this make it?
Well, and I think that's what I said, was that's kind of the point, is that there is a lot of stuff in there that if you were trying to make a beautiful picture, let's make a beautiful rainbow that everyone can enjoy and read, literally a literary, beautiful picture, we wouldn't include the warts and farts and all that stuff in there. We would make it a beautiful picture. And this is I believe it's in there to corroborate it being real people with real situations. It's not all beautiful and clean. It's actually got, it's got warts and love handles and all sorts of stuff going on, and none of them through there are the ones who fulfill the prophecy, going back to Genesis 3:15, which we talked about last year, which is the seed of Eve will come forth, and the serpent will bite him on the heel and basically bruise his heel, but he's going to crush the serpent's head. He'll ultimately win. And so that's the prophecy of the foretelling of Jesus, the Messiah. We don't know his name as Jesus until much later, but it's that coming Messiah through that line. And so maybe also, Chris, those warts and farts and love handles along the way are also saying, that wasn't it, that wasn't it, that wasn't it, that person's not it, that person's not it, that person's not it, until we get to Jesus. There he is.
Yeah.
Or it's a way that makes Jesus relatable to humans.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, we were talking about that a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
It does make it
He's
relatable.
fully God and fully man. It's the fully man part that makes him take our place, If it was just fully God, then he wouldn't be replacing us. It would just be God working with God's realm. He had to cross over into our realm. So,
Some cookies up
yeah, there's a few cookies over there.
And I got pretzels and apples.
He brought a whole grocery store in here.
Well, you never know.
He asked if I wanted to come, I told him he had to feed me.
I know, now I feel bad. I always have food on me.
So I was teasing.
I've got beef jerky out in the truck.
I was totally kidding.
No, listen,
Yeah, that's good stuff.
you gotta eat.
That's good stuff.
You gotta eat.
So, just a quick touch after last week. I said very quickly in Exodus, we're going to immediately jump into the carryover. So, and if you didn't notice, I found an MEV hard copy. I haven't found one. I finally found one, and it's big print too, so I can read it. So go back to Genesis. Go back to Genesis 50, and it says, 49, chapter 49, Genesis, verse 29. Okay, so Jacob, he charged them and said to them, I'm about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that's in the field of Ephron the Hittite, and the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is there before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought along with the field from Ephron the Hittite as a burial place. And they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife there. They buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife there. And I buried Leah there. And the field and the cave is there were purchased from the children of Heth. And when Jacob finished instructing his sons, he drew his feet into his bed, breathed his last, and he was gathered to his people. So we see that Jacob's he's passing on into the afterlife. Come on in, man. And so Joseph fell on his father's face, and he wept and cried and all that stuff. And then we see that it says there's going to be a funeral procession, basically. And I'm calling it like a Hebrew, what did I call it? I call it the Hebrew New Orleans funeral procession. Because it was this huge to-do. I mean, they had this big... So we see here in verse 4 of chapter 50, when the days of his mourning were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, if now I have found favor in your eyes, speak to Pharaoh, saying, my father made me swear, saying, I'm about to die, bury me in my tomb, which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. Now therefore, please let me go and bury my father. And Pharaoh responded and said, in verse 6, go up and bury your father, as he made you swear to do. So he's like amenable to this. He's okay with this. Verse 7, so Joseph went up to bury his father, and all the servants of Pharaoh went up with him, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt. All the house of Joseph and his brothers and his father's household, they left only their little ones and their flocks and their herds in the land of Goshen. But both the chariots and horsemen also went up with him. It was a very great company. So here we see Pharaoh is like promoting the celebration of the life of this Hebrew guy, because it's Joseph's dad, and he has great regard for Joseph, right? So very quickly, now that we're going to go into Exodus here, we go to Exodus chapter 1, we turn the page, and I'm going to read it here with us. I have the modern English version. Some of you are using other versions. That's okay. I just like the modern English myself, so you're welcome to read along. I ordered it.
What did you?
Yeah, I ordered it online.
What do you use, Taylor?
I cross-reference different translations, so right now I'm doing ESV.
Okay.
ESV is great too. I love ESV. I don't hate any version. I just like other ones more than others.
Yeah.
So here I'm going to read in Exodus chapter 1, and then we're going to go back into some background history. But I want to connect last week to this week. I want to connect Genesis to Exodus here. Okay. Now these are the names of the sons of Israel. Here's your genealogy, Chris. Which came into Egypt. Each man in his household came with Jacob. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All the people who came from the seed of Jacob were 70 people. But Joseph was in Egypt already. And if you remember, he had 66 already with him. So there's 136 people that are gathered up in Goshen, the northeast part of the delta. They're gathered up in Goshen. And Joseph died, as did all his brothers, all that generation. So we actually see here, Joseph didn't get as big of a funeral procession. There was no big, to-do to get him back to the cave, Machpelah, and all that stuff. Joseph died, as did all his brothers. It's kind of like a footnote almost. Okay? Nevertheless, the sons of Israel, the sons of these guys, these 12, were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and became exceedingly mighty, so that the land was filled with them. Okay, so this is where we see God's blessing. Remember, God said, I'm going to make you a great nation. You're going to be more than the sands of the sea, more than the stars of the air, stars in the sky, and I'm going to give you this land of Canaan. Well, they're not in Canaan right now. They're in Egypt. But remember, God preserved that lineage by bringing them out of Canaan. Joseph preserved them and got them special favor. And remember, it wasn't about Joseph. The Pharaoh and the Potiphar, the guard, the director of the guard, and all that stuff, they kept saying, I see God on you. I see God's hand in your life. I see God with you. Your God's on you. Okay? So here we are in verse 8. Exodus 1, verse 8. Now there rose up a new king over Egypt. There's your turning point right there. Who did not know Joseph. So this is saying, for example, let me give you an American example. This is saying, I am Dwight D. Eisenhower. I led the Allied coalition to fight World War II and win the war against the axis of evil, okay? And a new president came to power who did not remember Dwight Eisenhower. Who did not recognize Dwight Eisenhower and his accomplishments.
Wow.
That's what it's saying.
Yeah.
Are you picking what my picture is?
Yeah, okay, right on, yes, right.
So it's saying in verse 8 here, a new king, Pharaoh, came in over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Mm-hmm. So before we go any further, let's go back and let's think about what this means. So if you take the genealogies and you go back through time, we see that Joseph's arrival in Egypt was about 1870 to 1890 BC, or as they call it now, before current era, BCE, which whatever, it's still BC. And he reigned there for approximately 40 years or so, and as the second in command of Egypt. We talked about the canal that he dug out and filled up the lake when it filled up during the good 7 years, and there was famine, and he was selling the grain, and then the people were still hungry, and so they started selling their land and themselves as slaves to Pharaoh. So they were basically volunteering to become slaves so that they could be fed. They were trading security for freedom. And we see the Nubian Empire, which is down here in the south. Actually, I can point to it here. The Nubian Empire, which is right here, and the Egyptian Empire. The Nubians came to Pharaoh at the time and said, we don't have any food either. Buy our lands from us. And he united the upper, actually during that time, and afterwards, the empire went all the way up the Nile, all the way down to here into Tanzania at some point. It was all the way down to here. But he really had a stronghold here, and then over into Canaan, over into Libya, down to Sudan, all this area here. And that was Sesostris, Pharaoh Sesostris, the second, and then the third was so it's the son of Sesostris the first, the second and the third, so the son and the grandson, were the pharaohs during the time of Joseph. And there's records that show that they were there during the canals and the granaries. I showed you pictures of the granaries. We'll get you onto the group me. I have pictures that I put of stuff on there. So you can see all the pictures on there. You saw pictures on there? Yeah. Okay, good. So the granaries are all in there. You can see they're really big places where they put all the grains for the good 7 years when they harvested. And then they were selling it out of there for the next 7 years of famine. Then
Karen she needs pictures to comprehend things. So it will help her.
Next time we'll print out some coloring books. Next time we'll print out coloring books. Brian's like, yes, coloring books.
Dot to dot.
Yeah.
It will help her.
I love
Where's
that.
that? I was hoping for like felt people here.
Okay.
I love that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Bring that back.
that's hilarious. So let me give you an example. This is the timeline, and it's going to go, that direction further. I'm not going to go into that. And we're way over here somewhere. In about 3600 BC, I'm not giving you specific because they really don't quite know.
No, they don't. I've been researching this. It's all over the place.
About 3600 BC, and you can kick in here too, because I know you studied stuff too. This is when the giant temple, the Great Pyramid, was built. 3600. here we are, the 1800s. The pyramid was already there before Joseph went over
Oh,
there.
yeah. Yeah, Moses, they had to pass by him.
They had to walk past these giant artifacts. I mean, think about it. I talked about this last time. There is this kind of like study the Bible history, and then there's kind of this world history, right? And a lot of times they kind of teach them as parallel universes that never intersect. But really, this is what's going on. The Bible is on the timeline of our natural history of our planet. They just separate it out, okay? So 1800s, we have Joseph, and within the next 400 to 430 years, I think they said something like 423, 439, something like that. We'll call it 430 for a round number. There is, so that brings us up to the 1400s there, because it's, whatever. So it's the 1400s at that point. We have Sesostris, right? Remember I told you about Sesostris? And it's the second and the third. And then it goes through a succession of a number of people, because 400 years, no one's living that long anymore. Post-flood, so no one lives that long anyway. The reigns are typically lasting between 7 and 70 years during this time. So they're kind of you'll have all these different people between here and here. And then you get to here, and you have a dude named Amenemhat. I don't know, how do you pronounce that, Chris?
I don't know.
Amenemhat the third.
He's like a rapper.
He had a big chain around his neck and it was hanging there. Amenemhat.
Mouse.
It wasn't Akhenaten or
No, he's over in here.
Okay.
He's in here. It's Amenemhat the third, and so there's actually after Sesostris, there's Senusret, and there's like Senusret 1, 2, 3, and then there's Amenaten, and there's Aten, and there's all these other ones, and then we get to Amenemhat the first, and then Senurat the third, Amenemhat the second, Senurat the third, Amenemhat the third. Yeah. Amenemhat. Yeah, there's all these names. And they all mean stuff in Egyptian, but I don't speak Egyptian.
Like Ptolemy. I had to be able, somebody to tell me how to pronounce Ptolemy.
Yeah.
Because you'll get into him too.
Yes.
Later on.
Yeah, later on. So Amenemhat, and he was married to shoot, just made me forget her name. Not Cleopatra, obviously. She comes later anyway, but
Nefertiti or
it's dang, I forgot. I looked it up. I looked it up today. I wanted to make sure I remembered it, and I forgot it.
Never really.
But it is his wife, who is his daughter. So kind of some weird stuff happening here. And what we know is that they had a son who didn't survive. I want you to remember that. Because we're gonna talk about that in about 10 chapters. We're gonna hit on that, okay? But here we are, and then 1400. So let's just say this is Jesus, okay? 400 years before that, you see Isaiah doing some prophecy. 700 years is Jeremiah. You've got these people that are in between where we are now and where Jesus is coming later. We have other things that are going to happen in between. As a matter of fact, they actually, we're going to talk about the Exodus. Exodus means the group of people leaving. And so we're talking about specifically the Hebrew people leaving the land of Egypt. But there's also going to be a number of exoduses and exiles. Exile means I got pushed out of there. Exodus means I'm leaving on purpose. Exile means I got taken away or whatever. I'm pushed out. Right. Okay. And so the exile in Babylon happens during this time. So a lot is going to happen between Jesus and where we are now. So even though it's only about 1,400 years or so, there is a ton that's going to happen between here and here. I mean, all the stories of David, Bathsheba, all that stuff is going to go down between here and here. The judges, Samson, Delilah, all that stuff's happening. So we're going to have a real busy time period. And then for 400 years, again, spiritually speaking, spiritually quiet, nothing happens for 400 years between the last of the prophecies and the arrival of Jesus on the scene. So we really have about 1,000 years of super activity happening, and then 400 years of silence, and then Jesus arrives. Is that giving you kind of context of where we are in the scriptures? Creation was, this is way back here. Creation would have been about 1,500 years before this. If you look at the genealogies, I'm broad general strokes, we're not going into great detail on that stuff today.
Yeah.
But we've talked about the genealogies previously. If you've been here, you've seen that. So we can kind of see now that it's about 4,000 years to Jesus, and about 2,000 years from Jesus to us. So when you talk about somebody who's called a young earth creationist, that's somebody who sees the earth being between 6,000-7,000 years old for these reasons. Now we're not going to get into, we actually had some great conversations last year when we were talking about Genesis creation stuff. We're not going to get into that today, but if you want to have the conversation, text me, call me, we'll talk about it. But this kind of gets us up to on the timeline of where we are. Again, the pyramid, the Great Pyramid of Giza, has already been here for 1,800 years before Joseph's here on the scene. So that thing is, and I actually have some other cool stuff. I may send some links to some videos. They're figuring out how the pyramids were made. It's really cool stuff. I'm sure you've seen a bunch of it.
I got some good theories too. I was going to talk maybe next week about why did they quit building pyramids. It's interesting. There's a reason why they quit building them. Why? Because think about it. The culture hadn't changed a lot. They should still be building them, for the king. But there's a reason why, and it's interesting. Why? What made them quit building the last pyramid?
I'd be interested to find out about
it's
that.
pretty cool.
All right, do you have anything to add to what we're talking about here?
I was going to talk, mine's going to be more non-biblical from a world history standpoint.
Extra biblical?
But it actually leads into what, we're talking about. The time frames from my study is a little different than yours, but like you said, it just,
They don't
you
usually
couldn't nail
super
it.
know.
It's just hard to nail this. The book of Exodus is set in the time of the late Bronze Age. The Bronze Age is important. Bronze is made out of copper and zinc. Well, when the Bronze Age came about, that's when the weapons really started coming about. That's when man really started going to war and going to battle, because copper bends. You can't make a sword out of solid copper. You have to put it with zinc and brass, and that makes bronze. I don't want any cookies, man. Thank you, though. So this is the Bronze Age. What Brad's talking about is the Bronze Age, is what's going on. And this was the time Egypt was dominated by the kingdoms of Egypt and the Hittites and the Midianites. These three kingdoms battled for the influence over common Syria. So everybody knows what Syria, the capital of Syria is Damascus. So that'll give you, the road to Damascus. What else is cool? Pharaoh, a lot of people don't know this. Outside the Bible, how do we know this even happened? Well, the Brooklyn Papyrus, it's called the Brooklyn Papyrus because it's in the Brooklyn Museum. It was a manuscript that had been found, and what it is from an Egyptian employee that actually worked for the city of Egypt. He worked under Pharaoh. His job was he handled 100 Hebrews. Okay, he was over 100 Hebrew slaves. How do we know they're Hebrew? Because he even listed the names of all these people. They were Semitic names. So that's what was cool. It backs up.
Like, for example, though, so if I said your name was Smith, would you have an idea where that person was from? Pretty generic. But if I gave you the name McDuffie, where are they from?
Yeah.
Ireland
Yeah.
or Scotland.
Scotland, right?
There you go.
So what he's talking about is they had very specific names that when you said those names, you say, oh, I know where that's coming from.
Yeah, because they weren't Egyptian names.
They weren't Egyptian names.
Egyptian by origin. And what was so cool is this guy goes into such detail about these each. It's almost like he had a relation Like he was friends with these people. His job was to, while the 400-year slavery, his job was if they had any medical issues. What went on during this time was there were a lot of snake bites. Because he even lists what happened. A lot of spider bites. More people were killed by hippopotamus back then. You know, hippo, even to this day, is not the lion is the most dangerous in Africa, it's the hippo. Hippo kills more people than a lion.
Yep.
This was going on big time back in these days. They actually, and this is why I got the, I was going to read, I won't go into too much of it tonight, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. It's not what it sounds, it's not some creepy cultish thing. What it is, it's a funeral procession is all this is. There's, when an Egyptian dies, these are prayers. They worship the god Osiris. So these are Egyptian prayers to Osiris. And they even have a prayer that when you walk down to the river, that you'll chant this prayer that you don't get eaten by a crocodile. So that tells you how people were getting killed back then. There's even one that you pray over your children to Osiris, that hippos don't kill the little children. Or they don't call them snakes, they call them vipers. But what's so cool about this, the Brooklyn Papyrus is it almost backs up the Bible. It backs up what it's saying. And I'll read this part right here. Let me get to it. Let's see. The Hebrews as a people are not directly mentioned in the Egyptian monuments or texts from any of the periods proposed by the Exodus. This is not exceptionally surprising. Since the events was disastrous for Egypt, Egyptian texts are notoriously propagandist and pro-Egyptian. Remember, throughout history, the victors are the ones that write the history books, right? So same thing here. This is why a whole lot was not written. Thus, we are left to read to search for conditions in Egypt that would be right for such an escape. The general nature of Egypt in the 13th century BC fits well with what we read in Exodus. First, in the 14th and 13th centuries, there were massive building projects like he was talking about. This was the heyday of Egypt, man. This was like when Vegas was going strong back in the 50s and 60s, right? This was what's going on in Egypt. That required huge workforces. Some of this construction, now this is not from the Bible, this is actually atheistic, and I'm reading this for a reason, occurred in the Nile Delta area abutting the land of Goshen, which he was talking about. The residents of the Hebrews building the north began under Pharaoh Horemheb, the last king of the 18th dynasty. Now, you know the difference between a dynasty and a kingdom, right? A dynasty is family operated. Dynasty means a son will take over. A son will be the heir. It's not like that always with a kingdom. The greatest builder of the time, well, this time was Ramses II. His activity in the Nile Delta region has been described by Egyptologist Kenneth Kitchen as follows. One of his first acts was to proclaim the founding of a new capital called the Domain of Ramses, around his father's summer palace on the north shore of Osiris. This is the Delta residence of Ramses' kings. The Ramses of Exodus was laid out on the grand scale. Great stone temples of the gods arose in each of the 4 points. The great royal palace was of brick with stone-framed doorways. Its staterooms brilliant with glazed tile decorations. Has anybody ever seen the movie Alexander, when he went in and conquered Babylonian, and it was the beautiful blue with yellow lions on the gates?
That's the Ishtar Gate.
They have that gate in the London Museum right now. That's how you can picture what Egypt looked like. It was beautiful. We just see this desert land right now. It wasn't. The Fertile Crescent, I think, was going down further. Everything was green. The Nile watered everything. But if you could ever Google that gate, it's gorgeous. And that's what Egypt looked like. It was beautiful. It was colored. The great royal palace was a brick stone frame. Houses and villas of royal princesses and high officials clustered everywhere. Officers, barracks, stores, and warehouses were everywhere. Excavations, all these different places. And there's one thing I want to read right here. This is interesting. I'll stop. Here's what I love about this. Okay, the writer, this atheist won't admit that Moses wrote Exodus, but here's what he says. He says, whoever the author was had to know what he was talking about. The writer demonstrates this reality by employing linguistic parallels and Egyptian loanwords throughout. In addition, Egyptian names of people, gods, and locations accurately reflect one in use during the mid to late second millennium. The author also makes frequent allusions to Egyptian times. Finally, he demonstrates a keen knowledge of Egyptian literature, sometimes using it as a foil to the teaching of the Old Testament. In other words, he often polemicizes against Egyptian beliefs and practices found in their text and can be seen, the Egyptian, and it gives the reference. But I love it because this guy, he won't admit Moses wrote it, but he says whoever did write it, no, he knew what he was talking about.
Yeah.
He goes, he would not have known the proper names of the different things.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that was just kind of an insight,
I like it.
about what we're talking to. And Pharaoh's army, when God hardened someone's heart, nothing but destruction comes. Think what Pharaoh did. He sent the entire army after them. Mm-hmm. The Bible don't talk about what happened to Egypt right after that. Egypt had no more army. They got drowned. They all drowned, right? They all drowned in the Red Sea.
Yep.
All that was left was the home guard. Within 2 generations, in Exodus, a generation is 25 years for Exodus, is what specialists or researchers are calling it, not 40 years. But when there was no army left to protect Egypt anymore, it was just the home guard. And within 2 generations, the Persians and the sea people, Phoenicians, they'd never been attacked by sea before.
Yep.
They didn't know how to defend this. Egypt was conquered and they went into slavery.
Yep.
Isn't that amazing? The roles switched.
Yep.
Okay, Hebrews, they've been in bondage for 400 years. Now the Egyptians are in bondage. Because Pharaoh was so livid and mad, he sent every soldier he had and only left a few home guard to defend an entire kingdom.
Well, we're going to get into more of that as we get to those chapters. Let's go back into our text now. It's Exodus chapter 1. So verse 8, let's read verse 8 again, and we'll go from there. Now there rose up a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, surely the people of the sons of Israel are more numerous and powerful than we. So he's recognizing there's a problem. We have a foreign group of people here that are not Egyptian, and I'm pretty sure there's more of them than there are of us. Okay, so he's not seeing this as an asset, he's seeing this as a liability. Okay? Come, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when any war breaks out, they also join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. So, this first section, I've got little notes here on the side that I've written in here. This first section up here, verses 1 through 7, that's kind of remembering God's blessing that he left Jacob and Isaac and Abraham and all them, left the people of Israel, the people of the son of, his name is Israel, remember he got renamed, people of Israel, but they're not in the land of Israel, so they're not Israelites yet, but they're Hebrew people. And then in verses 6, 7, 8, and in verses 8, 9, 10, we see evil beginning to scheme. We see evil beginning to be plotted out, right? So we go to verse 11, therefore, what's the therefore? Therefore is therefore there, because it's telling us a cause and effect reaction, okay? So, because I see these people, and there's more of them than us, and I don't want them to fight against us and leave this land, because honestly, they're producing a lot of stuff for us. I don't want them to leave, and I don't want them to rise up against us and rebel. So therefore, because of that, here's what we're going to do. They set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their labor. And they built for Pharaoh storage cities, Pithom and Ramses. Now, I've talked about this before. Here's Goshen over here. Here's my little map. Damascus is way up here. The road to Damascus actually goes right over here across the Sea of Galilee, right through Capernaum and up into Damascus there. This is the Sea of Galilee. That's the Dead Sea. That's the Seir, S-E-I-R, the Seir Mountains down here. Moab is right around this area. This is the hill country of Canaan. Jerusalem's right here. And Goshen is this northeast corner of the delta. Cairo's modern day capital of Egypt, but the previous capital was Memphis. And then he was saying, as he was reading, they were relocating up here. Why do you think they were wanting to relocate up into the Goshen area? Because there were so many of them. They numbered so much. It's like, wait a minute, we got to put some custom and border patrol agents over there. We've got a problem. Okay, so they're thinking to themselves, we need to make sure we keep an eye on these people. So we're going to get close to them so we can control them. Okay, so that's what we see happening. And they put taskmasters over to afflict them. So it wasn't just that they just stepped in. We're like, all right, we're now your bosses. Y'all are slaves. Nothing like that. Remember what happened back in Genesis. What happened? During the famine. What happened during the famine?
They went to Egypt.
They went to Egypt, but then, even then, they ran out of food, and they sold their land and themselves as slaves. So they were already in a position where they were subjugated underneath the Egyptians at this point. Now, the Egyptians are saying, whoa, there's more of them that we can kind of control here. We've got way too many of these people here. But they are already...
So they're supposed to have crowd control.
Yeah. So they're saying, we put taskmasters over them to afflict them. Afflict them is the same word that talks about the suffering servant is talked about in Isaiah. It's the same mentality. It's we're going to make it painful. We're going to make it tough. Okay? Afflicted. They built for Pharaoh storage cities, Pithom and Ramses, and they were up here as well. Avaris, you mentioned that. Avaris is underneath the city of Ramses. Avaris predates Ramses. And contemporary to Joseph, Ramses wasn't here yet. But it's like saying, like I talked about before, if you go to 2928 Kirkendall, there's a Walmart there. You're in high school, there wasn't no Walmart there. It was cow pasture. But if I'm talking to you now, I said, yeah, we had to drive by the Walmart to get to Klein Oak. Like, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. There wasn't back then, though. So when I'm telling the story, I'm telling you landmarks that you know now about stuff that happened back then. So we're talking about building the storage cities of Pithom and Ramses. They're not saying that those were there during that time. He's saying, over there where those cities are, they built those up. Avaris was actually what one of them was called, but it got renamed later. Ramses, they built over top of it. So he's using contemporary. Remember, on the timeline, he's writing about stuff over here. Moses is already way over here. He's already experienced all this stuff. So he's writing about stuff that's in the past, but using contemporary names for things. You tracking with me? Mm-hmm. Remember what that tall tower in Galleria used to be called? Transco Tower. And now it's the Williams Tower. But I've always remembered it. I still remember it as the Transco Tower.
So I didn't know it changed.
It's been Williams Tower for a number of years now. But if I said Transco Tower, then you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
So it's the same idea. Like we're using contemporary terms to identify things. Okay. So let's continue. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. So that as a result, they abhorred the sons of Israel.
Well, stress is an aphrodisiac.
What verse are we at?
That's verse 13, 12. So they multiplied and grew, and so they were really kicking off the Egyptians here. Like there was already enough of you. We're trying to make life difficult, and here you are having more babies. What's up with that? We're trying to make it stressful so you can't, right? But who's in control? The Egyptians or God? Right? So the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. That means to make them tired. Mm-hmm. They wanted to make sure that they weren't, not 8-hour days, 12-hour days, 16-hour days, whatever it is. They're trying to make them so exhausted. Because if you're tired, you can't have more kids.
And then you have one Jezreel.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
Good boy. I like it.
We go there here on our Bible study. We go there.
I like it.
All right.
You know what reminds me of?
Yes,
In World War
so
II, the Japanese would starve the American soldiers. They knew just how much food not to give them to make them so weak that they didn't need to be guarded.
Right.
They couldn't escape.
They couldn't escape.
Yeah. All they do is lay down.
The science of being a taskmaster. It's pretty sad.
Yeah.
So they made the children of Israel, male and female, to serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard service, in mortar and in brick, and in all manner of service in the field, and all their service in which they made them serve was with rigor. Now, I'm going to let's put a pause right there. Let's put a pin in that for a moment. I put onto the group me, which I'll add to you later, Taryn. There's some pictures I added to you. The Black Pyramid of Dashur and the other pyramid of Hawara, which, whatever. Crazy fun names to say. Sounds like my little one's trying to pronounce something. And if you'll note, they look like they're falling apart, and that's because they are. Even the Great Pyramid, which we'll talk about. I'm gonna do some more research. I'm gonna find the video of it. They say that these pyramids are constructed from a material that's mud and straw mixed together, and they form it to bricks. They put it in the sun to bake it, and then they'll stack them up with mortar, with mud, and they'll build them up, and then they just kind of cover the outside with limestone to make it look nice and pretty.
Do it shine.
And it would shine in the sun. Well, these pyramids, and including the Great Pyramid, which I was talking to you about earlier, the Great Pyramid, if you look at it today, it's not bright and white and shiny.
It was.
It was. They have gone in and stripped it off for other things.
Yes, right.
Okay? So even if you have, now that one actually has like a concrete deal. I'll send you a cool video on that, for the Great Pyramid. But for these pyramids, these are with mud and straw. And of course, if it's covered with a limestone, polished limestone outer coating, then the mud and brick are just there to structurally support it. But now that it's been stripped off, any rain and wind that they do get is going to start breaking down that mud and brick. But this is what he was talking about. It's the heyday. You were talking about building like Vegas in the 50s and 60s. This is what they were doing. Is that they had them building with mortar and in brick during this time period. And of course, you see the old Charlton Heston 10 Commandments, and they're stomping the mud and all that stuff. That's really cool. But what's missed in that movie is look back with me in verse 14 here. It says, in mortar and in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. So what does that mean? They were raising the livestock. Remember, Pharaoh told them, oh, go raise my livestock too. Oh, you're selling me all your livestock so I can give you food. We talked about that already. Yeah. So they're raising all the animals out there, and this is a good place to raise the animals. Remember, he said it's the best land to do that. It's also harvesting the crops out in the field, right? And then continue to the end of verse 14. It says, and all their service in which they made them serve was with rigor. So it was, no, you're not gonna take shifts. We're gonna send you out there. You're like 24 on, 24 off. We're gonna try to kill you, like basically. We're gonna make it so tiring that you can't say, honey, I'm home. It's gonna be like, hey, honey, I'm barely alive. Okay? So they're trying to make it where this is the Egyptians' version of contraceptive. Okay, they're trying to say, listen, let's try to make it where they can't have kids. But God's in control, right? So my notes on the side here, we have God's blessing, a reminder of God's blessing in those first 7 verses. 8 through 10 is evil begins scheming. And then 11 through 14 is evil claiming authority over God's people. Evil scheming, and then evil claiming authority over God's people. But look what we have happen here in verse 15. The king of Egypt, Pharaoh, they just put king of Egypt in this version, but it's also Pharaoh in other versions. Don't freak out about that, same thing. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other was Puah. And he said, when you perform the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the stools, which we'll talk about in a second, if it is a son, then you must kill him. But if it is a daughter, then she may live. So what is Pharaoh telling these people, these midwives that are helping have, they didn't have hospitals and nurses, they didn't have the neonatal intensive care unit or the maternity ward. They had, hey, I hear she's screaming, she's having a baby. Okay, come on, let's go. And they're going to go help her have the baby. And apparently they didn't have the clinical tables that we have today where the women lie on their back and try to push the babies out, because then what good is that? I mean, I actually don't understand that whole process. Really, the historical way is to squat down, let gravity help pull the baby out.
That's what the Indians did back in the day.
Yeah.
Squatted down and
So they had a stool so they could kind of be in the position, and they would pull the stool out of the way and catch the baby, okay? So this is what the midwives are doing. And so he's saying, as they're sitting on the stools, if a son comes out, you kill him. Okay? So this is what we're going to call an Egyptian full-term abortion.
But they don't do that.
That's right. Egyptian full-term abortion. The baby comes out. If it's a boy, kill it.
Right.
If it's a girl, you can let it live. Okay? So we can tell that obviously the guys are the problem here. Okay? Because it's always the guy's fault.
That's right.
Hey, it's okay to joke. Doesn't mean you're right.
That's right.
Verse 17. However, the midwives, did they fear Pharaoh? No, they feared God, and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but kept the male children alive. And the king of Egypt called for the midwives. Hey, ladies, get over here. Why have you done this thing and preserved the male children's lives? Like, he sees there's a bunch of male babies wandering around here. Y'all didn't do anything I asked you to do. What's the problem here? Right? So my heading for this section is avoiding sin. Even when evil is scheming and evil's claiming authority, they are avoiding sin. They are standing up for what is right, not what they're being told to do.
Right, yeah.
Okay? So let's go to verse 19. The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwives come to them. So listen to what the midwives are saying. The Egyptian women are lazy birthers.
Yeah.
And they want to whine and moan and complain, and they want their epidurals, and they want all these things. But the Hebrew women, they're like, 1, 2, 3, hook! They got the baby spot. We can't even get there fast enough. So they're just having the baby. I mean, sorry, Pharaoh.
Yep.
Sorry, Pharaoh. So, the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwives come to them. Therefore, God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mighty. Okay?
So he rewarded them for their obedience.
Yeah, and not only that, look at verse 21. So it happened that because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Apparently they were just serving other women, but now here we see the midwives, maybe they had been barren, unable to have children, and now they're having children. So God's blessing them. So I put obedience to God results in blessings. So they were avoiding sin, and now obedience to God is in more blessings. So we see Satan's trying to do his thing. They're avoiding sin, doing the right thing, even though they're being told to do something bad. And God is blessing their obedience. And so we really see that in verse 21, where he blesses them that they have families now. And then verse 22, Pharaoh charged all his people now, not just the midwives, but all the people. Now he's putting a bounty out on Hebrew heads.
Right, yes.
He's putting a bounty out. Okay? And he's saying, all of you, you must cast every son that is born into the river, and you must preserve every daughter's life. Okay? So he's now reacting to, they avoided sin, God blesses them in obedience, and now his next step is to go to social coercion. When you see a Hebrew baby, grab it and throw it into the river.
Next one goes in the boat.
This, what was meant to be evil, remember Joseph even said this. He goes, what you meant by evil, to put me in the well, to sell me into slavery, for me to go into jail, to have all these things happen, I ended up being able to save your lives, brothers, so it's okay, I forgive you. So what Pharaoh is meaning to be evil, to cause great calamity upon the people of God, we're going to go next week into chapter 2, what means of oppression that Pharaoh put out, God's going to use to deliver his people. Okay? So we're going to talk about that next week. So I also have a couple of pieces of map history. So here's what we're talking about. Memphis is where the capital was when Joseph was there.
Eldest too.
Yeah.
And Elvis, that's correct. And remember Joseph's canal? and there's that lake over there now that they filled up. Well, they survived, and they had the great granaries and storehouses were here.
Yeah.
Where are they putting the storehouses now? In this chapter, when we read it, where are they putting the storehouses now? Over here, right?
Yeah, yeah.
They're putting the storehouses over here. So where is the seat of production? So if I told you, I said this last time, if you're coming from Europe and you're a farmer and you like to grow tall grains with seed heads on top, kind of like wheat or barley or something like that, and you're like, hey, I'm new to America and this is what I do. Where do I go? And so we'll say, oh, you do that? We wouldn't say, go to Colorado. That didn't make any sense. Go up in the mountains, right? Or we wouldn't say, go to Alaska. We wouldn't say, go to Maine. Like, that's not the right climate, geology, soils, whatever. We would say, go to Kansas, right? And so when we have the great grains that the Hebrew people are growing, remember, they're working with great rigor in the fields, not just with the animals, but also with the crops. So they are turning Goshen into a mecca of production. So the pharaohs that are coming through here, they're not blind to that. They're like, hey, why do we need to haul all the way over here to these old ancient granaries? Let's just build some new ones right here. We'll just package it right here where we're producing it. We're packaging it where we're producing it. Now, the other thing I want you to realize is the temple where they worshipped Pharaoh is still down here. It's still down here. They did have a temple of On, which is a temple to the sun up here. And the place where they're throwing the babies in the river is going to be, where are the Hebrews? They're up here. So where they're throwing them in the river, they're going to be throwing them into one of these tributary deltas. Which are these branches of the delta of the river. But when we see Moses is going to interact with Pharaoh, he's not going to interact with him over here. He's going to interact with him down here. And there's a reason for that, because God's going to put his hand and protect the people up here in the ocean. Questions?
You know, everything, well, back then everything was based around trade routes.
Mm-hmm.
So where did you say the road to Damascus was?
Yep, so there's a road that goes from Memphis up here to Goshen. Let me change colors so we can see it. That's a great question. So there's a road that went from Memphis up here and then over to Goshen like that. And then it went right across through here. This is the dry riverbed that was the historical boundary between Israel and Egypt, is right through here. So that goes past there. And then it goes up through here, up through Galilee, up to Damascus like this. This is what's called the Via Maris. Via Maris, the way of the sea. That's what that's called, because you can basically see the Mediterranean Sea anywhere along that route. There was another route that came down this direction, like this, and then it met up in Seir and came across this direction here. And this is the King's Highway. That's what they called it later. The person who used this the most, actually, that I know of, is Herod. He used this King's Highway to travel in his empire, and he built, down here, he built Masada, the great palace fortress, etc. down here. So he was using this. But the Via Maris is like this would be Highway 90 between Humble and Beaumont. This is I-10 over here. You can still get there basically here, but this is the main road.
You just take those routes.
Yeah. Now,
Trade routes.
I'm going to go off of Exodus just for a second, because we're talking about Via Maris. Right here, where the hill country drops down into this plain here, okay, there is, that's called the Jezreel Valley. So you have this kind of hill, and it comes down like this. And so this is the Jezreel Valley. Okay. Up here is this mountain or mount. In Hebrew, it's called the Har. And this mount is called Megiddo. Har Megiddo. So this is actually, later on, if we say Harmageddon, like Armageddon, the Battle of Armageddon, is going to be fought right here in this valley, trying to get into here. So the Battle of Armageddon is actually Harmageddo. And that's right here. They're trying to go out of this valley through the Via Maris up into the hill country. And the Jews, they knew this. They knew that was the choke point to come through this way. So they put right up here on the top of this thing, they put a toll booth. No joke.
Yeah.
More battles have been fought here on this piece of property than anywhere else in the world, because the Jews have set up, the Hebrews, the Israelites, whatever, set up a toll booth, keeping trade from going through the Via Maris free.
Put a tax on it.
They're taxing them. They're collecting a transport fee. And so all the goods coming through from the east, from Egypt, from Europe, from the east, from China, etc., all come through here to go to Egypt and then down to Africa. And then all the stuff coming from out of here goes up through here to get to the east and to Europe. So they were using this as a toll booth, and they had the technical advantage, the tactical advantage, because they're on a hill overlooking all these people down here.
And you know what sucked about those days? Is to be a merchant was very costly, because you said they had that toll booth, right? Mm-hmm. There would be lots of other illegal toll booths.
Oh, sure.
That a merchant would have to pay them guys.
Yeah, this guy could just set up a tent right here.
Yeah, and say he's with so-and-so.
Yeah.
And you would be taxed.
Yeah.
It's like that in India.
It's like
They will
that
actually
driving,
put
it's like
stuff
that driving
across the
through
road.
Mexico, get shook down.
Or they put stuff in the road where you can't pass.
Yeah.
And they won't move it until you give them money.
Sure, you grease the wheels.
Yeah, right. So I can see that happening. It would suck to be a merchant. It'd be hard to be a merchant back then.
Yeah.
Marco Polo talks about this. How much money they had to spend on the road to China, paying bandits off.
Yeah. So that doesn't have anything to do with today's topic, but I figured since I had the map drawn, we were talking about this. So remember from the Padam Aram, which is up here in Syria, to go down the Via Maris down here to Beersheba, which is right there.
How many miles that is?
500 miles.
500.
So it's about a month's journey to get there. It is 400 miles from Hebron to Memphis, which is where Joseph would have been originally. Now Joseph moved to Goshen, and I'm actually going to put on the group me a number of pictures. Actually, I put them on there last time, I think. I talked about the cemetery plot with the different ones. The one's in a pyramid shape that honors him. He's painted a coat of many colors on the statue in there. Like,
Yeah.
it's very interesting that they still have this stuff in Egypt. That one, that's in Goshen though. That's where those pictures are here. They're in Goshen. So it's 100 miles from Memphis to Goshen, and then 300 miles to Beersheba where they were. So it's 500 miles to Padam Aram.
I love to go to the Museum of Cairo. You know, I've seen documentaries on it.
Sure.
My God, it'd be interesting. Man, okay, so what's that for along the sea? What's that called?
The Via Maris.
Okay, so that's what I was researching. Here's what's strange. Most boats back then were made out of reeds.
Huh.
Then you put a bunch of reeds together.
Yeah.
And they did a deal. They actually built one that's like 40 feet long. But what happens is you can't go far from the shore.
Right.
Because they start getting waterlogged.
Yeah.
So shore has to stay in sight.
Yeah.
And you know what a weed is called once it gets in water? It's called a reed. You don't call a weed a reed when it goes to water. And the reason why, have you ever tried to pull weeds out of water? It's hard. They're very tough. The root system, even the texture of it once it hits water, it's just really, really strong. So that's the difference between a weed and a reed. I thought that was interesting.
That is interesting. So yeah, the Via Maris, and that's the journey that Saul on the road to Damascus, he would have gone this way. He would have gone down to Jericho, crossed over the Jordan, gone up this side, because this was bad country here. The Samaritan people, which they didn't like, I'm going to step around the road so I don't get myself unclean. They're going to go around the Samaritan area, and then he's going to come back across right here, go up to Capernaum, and then hit the Via Maris to head up to Damascus. That's the route that he would have taken.
It's still the same road, still there.
Yeah.
Man, I bet that road's got some stories.
Man. So, Exodus 1, any questions?